Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and once again, I'm delighted to be joined by Jim Orr. Welcome back to the studio, Jim. How are you?
Afternoon, Paul. Thanks for asking me.
Well, you're back in. It's a day before the big one, and we're asking the question, Jim, first and foremost, if former Celtic Kieran Tierney is deemed eligible to play for Arsenal this weekend, will there be a ruling that allows Ryan Christie to return to Celtic? And we will be asking our viewers and our listeners for their views on that. If you're watching via Facebook, Twitter and also YouTube, then please get involved in the conversation. And anything else you want to talk about, Celtic related, because we do have plenty to talk about on a daily basis. Jim, I'm going to be asking you about a famous Celtic season, and one that you have covered extensively back in the time of Wim Jansen. I can say that because he was only here for one season, and your memories of the games that we played that season. So first and foremost, we've had a wee chat last week about the forthcoming fixture. I've got two big games. How many people are talking about the AC Milan game on Thursday night?
It's Aberdeen next Sunday.
Yeah, big game after big game. So we'll have a wee look ahead as well to the AC Milan if we are able to do so. But obviously Arsenal and Mikel Arteta have been pushing for the return of one of Celtic's favourite sons. I can still call him that, KT. Before we talk about the, what might happen should Arsenal get Kieran Tierney back in the Arsenal lineup, what's your memories of Kieran as a player, Jim?
Exceptional player. Played for the jersey. Just a shame he moved on when he moved on, but totally understandable. I think a lot of the times you forget from the player's point of view, it's just a job at the end of the day. And if anyone's offered 3, 4, 5 times what you're getting paid, you're going to jump at the chance. So understandable he left, but disappointing he didn't stay for the 10.
It was disappointing, and I think every single Celtic fan took Kieran to their heart. And there was a lot of disappointment, obviously, when he left, Jim. And there was an interview fairly recently where he said that he didn't feel as though he was welcome back, or he was almost scared to come back to Celtic. Do you think, that's ridiculous, is it not?
Yeah, that's ridiculous, yeah. End of, yeah.
There's absolutely no reason why Kieran Tierney wouldn't be welcome back for the 10 in a row party should we be sitting here in May having wrapped up the 10th consecutive title. I
think there's too many nutters on social media, so you can't pay much attention to that. Never argue with idiots, because they'll tend to bring you down to their levels. So I think you can ignore all that stuff. I think if you'd a poll amongst the Celtic fans, 99.9% would welcome KT back with open arms.
Oh, absolutely, and I would be one of them. I think he's done brilliantly since he's gone down there. We're all aware of the situation that arose during the international break, obviously with Armstrong testing positive and then Tierney and Christie having to isolate. Now, that isolation takes us right up to this Saturday's games. Arsenal are pushing big time. Are Celtic, do you think, just waiting to see what happens with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure what Arsenal's case is, but if it pops up in Sky over there that KT can play tomorrow, one would imagine Ryan Christie plays tomorrow, but I wouldn't hold up much hope for that. I can't see the logic or the rationale or the reasoning why they would allow Kieran Tierney to play, but if he does, then there can't be any argument that Ryan Christie gets to play as well.
Now, we have been speaking about this game probably for the best part of the 2 weeks due to the fact that there was no games at the weekend there, Jim. So let's just recap on how you think this is going to go tomorrow. We're going to have another bulletin tonight, and the bulletin will be an Axon bulletin. It will be around 8 o'clock, and I will be joined by Jim Simonetti of the Jimmy Johnson Academy, and also Stevie Mullen from St Roch. So a good lineup tonight at 8 o'clock. It's a slightly different time, but it'll be interesting to see how many Celtic fans get involved. We do get a good audience in the afternoon, Jim, but I know that people are getting home and they've maybe got a routine where they're listening to various radio shows, and why not tune into a Celtic State of Mind instead?
Yeah, I think we sat here last week and we talked about Eddie's out of the game and Ryan Christie's out of the game, and we talked about the fact that this was such an unusual season. It's been such an unusual week in terms of what's happened and what could have happened with the team, because it could be that Eddie could play tomorrow, and depending on the Kieran Tierney result, it could be Ryan Christie plays tomorrow. And I think when we got to Monday last week, I think we lost Near Beaton, and El Hamid was about to be counted out as well. And sad person that I sat down and wrote out my worst case scenario team, and I thought, if nobody comes back, if every international player catches COVID or has to self-isolate, what are we left with? So
interesting.
Make up this team, and I think that should be good enough that team. And then Baines in there and your pal, right back Tony Ralston and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, that team's not good enough. And then on Twitter on Tuesday, and there's a tweet from Celtic saying, good luck, Diego. So what's this? So Laxalt was playing for Uruguay. So he's travelling halfway around the world and you think, hold on, he's now out the worst case scenario team because he's going to get this thing as well. And then that night, there's a flash comes up, Scotland are 2 up, second goal scored by David Turnbull. Thinking, what? What's happening here? There was an under-21 game on Tuesday night.
Yep.
No idea that was happening. So all of a sudden, Turnbull's out, the worst case scenario team. So you're starting to struggle that if nobody comes back, what kind of team are we going to have? And then it occurred to me again that the fact that Eddie was counted out last week, it wasn't even with the main national team, it was under-21 team. And you start looking at the whole farcical situation. Why were they asking under-21s to play? Never mind the main teams. And then when you look at the competitions that are playing, this Nations League, they could have left that to maybe next March or next April.
Yeah.
Because the point behind the Nations League is to give a kind of backdoor entry to teams who weren't good enough to qualify through the normal routes. So this season they should have said, you know what, see if you're not good enough to qualify, that's you out this time. They should have done that. And I'd have left, if you take the Scotland position, they'd potentially a semi-final and a final to play, 2 games. So rather than have an international break, September, October, November, just have one and play those 2 games, in that one break. Maybe November, leave it as late as possible. And do what they did with the Champions League, whereby take all those, I think it was 16 teams involved in this. Take the 16 teams to Germany or to Portugal and play it Wednesday, Saturday. If you get knocked out on the Wednesday, then you're back up the road. If you win, then you play the final playoff game on the Saturday. Because this whole thing about players potentially getting COVID, I think nobody knows how bad COVID is unless you actually get COVID. And we're a bit simplistic in reviews of Eddie, I think. Because I know somebody who's picked up COVID back in April. Young guy in his 20s, and he's still not over it yet.
No.
He still can't do a week's work. He's in his 20s, young guy. So most of our players are young guys in their 20s. And what if this affected Eddie significantly? What if? I mean, Eddie's one of these guys where we know that, in 5 years' time, he'll be playing for one of the top leagues in Europe. He'll be earning a fortune. He'll be playing for the national team, etc. But what if COVID had such an effect on him? There was some long-term health issues with him. His lungs went, or whatever it was. So rather than having this big transfer fee in a couple of years' time, what if it affected him so badly that he was 2 or 3 yards short, he couldn't last 90 minutes? Where does the blame lie there?
Well, this is a great topic actually, Jim, because when the news broke that obviously Edouard had tested positive, I think as football fans, as pundits, you're watching the news breaking on mainstream channels, and at no point does anyone give that consideration. Straight away you're looking at, will he be fit for Saturday? So there's this, you basically pigeonhole footballers into a different category than the normal 20-odd-year-old male that you've already mentioned. I
think that's the thing that I want to be looked into in terms of the next international break, November. Right? I think every team, every player is quite entitled to say, no, I'm not going. Because of the duty of care, because Celtic and other teams have got a bubble and they're spending a fortune to make sure that everything works right. And then once they go away out that bubble, so who actually asked them to go out the bubble? Is that a UEFA stipulation? If you're asked to go, you have to go. Is it the French Federation? Who is it? So if you took that, I mean, it's obviously a kind of an extreme situation whereby if a top player contracted COVID and it was serious and it affected his long-term future, who does he blame? Who does he sue? And if you're going to sue UEFA, and it was Eddie, for example, so Eddie, in 2 or 3 years' time will be earning £4 or £5 million a year. And he'll be playing for 10 years. So he could potentially lose £40, £50 million by going to play for the French under-21 team in a meaningless game. So say that was to happen, who does Eddie sue for his £40, £50 million?
Well, this is the thing, because Celtic are obliged. Right. Celtic are obliged to release the player.
So if that was an actual fact, if that actually did happen, and there's a few players did that, so if the player that does that is looking to send UEFA a bill for 40, 50 million, they might rethink that. Because the fact that, as I said 5 minutes ago, the fact that all these tournaments are on in a global pandemic, you have to ask serious questions of the people who run UEFA.
Yeah.
And the fact that there's no fans at the games, it doesn't matter. And even from Celtic's point of view, I mean, the whole playing 6 Europa League games this season, why? You know, you could play 3 and you could play them all over the course of 1 week. Do the same thing again. It doesn't matter. So why are we playing 6 games? Why is it home and away? Because again, when we do it next time, and I think the big issue this week is because of the magnitude of the games that they potentially might miss. I think if we're playing Hamilton or Livingston tomorrow, then you could lose half your team, and with no disrespect to them, you should have enough in your squad to beat a Hamilton or a Livingston. Whereas we're playing our closest challengers. In fact, they are the league leaders. And we've got you've got AC Milan on Thursday.
Yes.
So I think the big issue is because who we're playing. And that's why people are making such a big fuss about it. But the whole thing comes back to health. And health should be the most important thing. The duty of care thing. And it's a kind of thing teams say, but what does that actually mean? And what have UEFA done in terms of their duty of care to the players in their association? Don't know. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, when we looked over the international break, there were international friendlies. You've mentioned the tournaments, Jim. And I mean, the Nations League, regardless of your interest in international football or not, it's a money-making exercise. And I've heard a lot of the international managers saying, it's better than playing friendlies. Well, if you add that competitive edge, then the chances are you'll sell more tickets for the games.
I think it's actually a really good idea. Now, if you're going to play international football, the reason that they've put this thing in is because nobody wanted to play friendly games. Players didn't want to play it, fans didn't turn up. So they came up with this wee idea, make it competitive, and there's a bit of a carrot at the end of it. So for the Euros, you've got a chance to actually qualify for the Euros through the back door. So that's a good idea. The World Cup, you've got a chance to go into the playoffs of the World Cup. No one's arguing that it's not a good idea, but not this year and not now. It was a chance, as I said, for teams who weren't good enough to qualify to get in. And this is the year you used to just say, you know what, if you're not good enough to qualify normally, we're not doing it this year.
This year, of all years.
And they'd have waited. I mean, that's the fact that Scotland, and I'm assuming every other international team, played 2 games in September, 3 games last week, and 3 games, is it November again? There's 8 games. Totally unnecessary. And what I just said earlier about, the playoff games, they were big games, a chance to actually qualify. So play them by all means, but do it differently. And don't, have teams having to travel. Because the Scotland team next month is going to Serbia, isn't it? They're going to Serbia. And we're going to have the same thing again.
You open up that situation once again. You open up the doors to the virus spreading again, Jim.
Aye. And I think we're playing Hibs at Easter Road after that, and then Sparta away, I think. I think it's 2 away games after that. It's bonkers. It's madness. All things madness.
No, it is. And again, it all just comes down to money. Yes, it's better to play competitive football, but it comes down to the balance sheet, Jim, and it's all about money making before having the players' best interests at heart. And that's why we've got a plethora of players who are out, not only for Celtic, but across the board. And Celtic have been hit particularly hard by this. And I'm hoping we've got the ticker tape playing up on the wall there, Jim. I'm hoping we don't get any breaking news saying that anyone else is affected, because we know that, for example, Shane Duffy was part of that, the Republic of Ireland side, and there was loads of them affected by it, You've travelled with a team, you've been in the same kind of hotel, etc. as a team, training with them. So yeah, there's a big concern with that. So your worst case scenario team, let's talk about your team before we get to the audience who are joining us through our social media channels.
If everyone's fit. Everyone is fit.
Does that include, Eddie is back, but with what you've just said there, is he actually going to be a player that you can even consider on the bench? Because, he's had this illness, he's been in isolation, he's been training on his own. Yes, he said he didn't feel any ill effects, but, is it a good idea to have him thrown back in?
Again, because we've no idea what COVID is like unless you've actually got it. If it was something like a mild cold, for example, and Eddie's not played in 2 weeks, and he had a mild cold, over the mild cold, keeping himself relatively fit. At this stage of the season, not having a game for a couple of weeks may be a good thing. So, if you were to assume that everyone is fit and raring to go, I think there's about 7 players picked themselves without even thinking about it, and that would be Barkas, the back 3, Duffy, Ayer, Julian, Scott Brown, Callum McGregor. Who's my 7th? Barkas, 3 at the back. Barkas, Duffy, Julian, Ayer, Frimpong in one wing, McGregor, Brown. Who do you play at left wing? Is it Laxalt or Taylor? I go with Laxalt, I think, because I think we should be going to playing the game tomorrow to play the game as opposed to playing the team. You know, if you play the game, you'll say, well, we're actually the best team, let's go out and play our game and let them worry about us. If you play the team, then you'll say, well, what are their strengths? And how do you combat their strengths? I think you said the other day that, you know, I think their obvious strengths are their wide players, Barisic and Tavernier, how you pronounce that. They get the ball wide and they put the ball in quick and they play with a lot of pace. So do you say, well, let's pick a team to combat that? Or do we pick a team to make them think about us? So 3 at the back, and do you go 5 in midfield and 2 up top, or do you go something different from that? I think I'll play Cham from the experience point of view. And the 2 up top, if they were fit, as I said last week, huge fan of Lee Griffiths and Eddie, if they're fit. If they're not fit, then maybe only 1 up top with Griffiths, and then maybe Mo Elyounoussi maybe just playing off him, type of thing. So I think 7, the players pick themselves. Depends on your view on the left-hand situation, and depends what kind of formation you do. But at the end of the day, I think you also said the other day that Lenny's got a kind of habit of throwing in a curveball somewhere. So who's the curveball? Could that be David Turnbull? Could that be Rogic? Could that be something like that? So if it was down to me, I would go 3-5-2, Eddie and Griff up front, Cham in the middle with McGregor and Brown, Frimpong, Lassalt, wings in the usual back 3.
I like the look of that side because other than Edouard, who I don't think will start, that's the team that I picked, Jim, with Elyounoussi up there with Griff, just playing off with Griffiths. The curveball, as you say, I think it's either Klimala up front or potentially Turnbull. And let's not forget Ayeti. That could also be a surprise inclusion because we don't know how fit he is. How fit has he managed to get over the last couple of weeks?
So I think he's been a great signing so far. But the thing I've noticed about him, he doesn't move around too much. And I think for tomorrow, I'd like to have players with a bit of movement amongst them, and that's why Griffiths will take them all over the place tomorrow. And if they play Mo, he's another guy who'll take them all over the place. So that'll create space for other people. I think Ayeti, maybe because he's maybe not up to fix yet, a bit too static. He's like a penalty box player. And whether he'll get lots of chances tomorrow, I don't know. So I'd like a lot of movement in the team. So I'll go for that 11.
Now, as I said before, Jim, we're going to be joined this evening at around 8 o'clock. We'll confirm that nearer the time due to travel, etc. We're going to be joined by Stevie Mullen, the president of St Roch's, and also Jim Simonetti, who runs the Jimmy Johnson Academy. We'll be talking all about tomorrow's game. We'll get a different perspective. And we'll be inviting the audience to get involved via Twitter, Facebook and YouTube. And I think at that time of the night, we should get quite a bit of interest and quite a bit of engagement from people who tune into a Celtic State of Mind, of which there are many, and we really appreciate it. We're going to be going to some of your questions and queries in just a moment, and we'll also be able to talk to Jim about some of his memories from that historic season when we stopped the 10. So, Jim, you are famed for Bend It Like Bratback. Last week you told us all about Bend It Like Bertie. You've previously worked on Bend It Like Baxter. So there's a wee thread developing. But let's go back to that season, the season of the Bratback, the year of the year of the Brat. And Wim Jansen coming in, obviously you have studied that season to the nth degree for your play. What's your big memories of the games we played that season?
Games against Rangers?
Yes.
Yeah. There was they were really important games. There were games that changed the season, basically, and they were all a wee bit different when you think back to them. Because the first game was meant to be played early on in the season. I think it was going to be the third or the fourth game of the season, and we'd lost the first 2 games, and they were on fire. And Negri was scoring goals for fun. I think he scored 5 goals in one game.
Was that Dundee United, I think?
Dundee United. And I think if we had played what was called the Old Firm game, then we'd have lost it. We'd definitely lost the game. And we'd have went 9 points behind. And if we'd have went 9 points behind that early in the season, it was finished, and that would have been the 10. And the game wasn't played because that was the death of Dye. So the game was meant to be on, it was on Monday night, it was meant to be on at Celtic Park. And Princess Di died on the Sunday, I think it was, and they cancelled all the games. So it was a bit of a let-off for Celtic not to have to play that game because we'd have lost it, definitely. The first game of the season was actually Ibrox then, and we go to Ibrox. An interesting thing now I can come to think of that, because if you think of the situation tomorrow, they're trying to stop us doing the 10, so they're coming to Celtic Park. When we tried to stop them doing the 10, we went to Ibrox Park twice and lost twice. Right? And those were the days that we had that kind of inferiority complex. You couldn't help but have that if you've lost 9 championships in a row, even though you thought you might beat them on a one-off occasion. So going to Ibrox, you were a bit wary and a bit, as I said, a bit of an inferiority complex. They might have that tomorrow. You know, they're maybe coming with that kind of attitude tomorrow. So we go to Ibrox, and I think we played reasonably in the first half, but they just signed Richard Gough back, and Gough, you couldn't make it up, scores the only goal of the game, and that was the game that he ran back to the crowd and gave it the 10 fingers.
Although to this day he denies it.
It's on video, so
it's there. He says he was raising the roof, Jim.
He was raising the roof.
He certainly was giving us the 10 fingers.
For every 10 fingers, we'll spend 5 fingers, is that how it works? So then the rescheduled game is then played. I think it was the week after that game. So you just lost 1-0 at Ibrox. The league was still relatively close. There was only a few points in it. And then we played them at Celtic Park. And I was at that game, because the season ticket holder. So I was at that game. And that was the game that Gascoigne got sent off by John Lowbotham. And then Negri scores kind of against the run of play, which tended to happen back then. So 1-0 down against 10 men. So, you know, the 10 in a row is looking like almost guaranteed then. And then into injury time, and Alan Stubbs pops up with equaliser in something like the second minute injury time. And that was one of the most pivotal goals of the season. Yeah. Basically, again, we don't score that one. I think we'd have went 5 or 6 points behind at that point, because I think Rangers had a wee dip in that season. They were quite inconsistent that season as well. I mean, if they'd have played the way they could have played, they'd have ran away with the league, but they weren't. They were quite inconsistent. And Wim tended to get a bit of a tune out the Celtic team, and we kind of kept on their coattails for most of the season. So Big Stubbs scoring kind of kept us in it. And then you fast forward to the New Year's Day game, and you alluded to the game the other day where Anoni had Laudrup in his back pocket. But it was 0-0 at half time, and Harold had missed 2 or 3 really good chances. Because he was quite a frustrating player to most of the fans, because he was really, really fast and he got himself in the right positions, but through a combination of maybe bad luck, poor finishing, good goalkeeping, Andy Gorham, the usual kind of stuff, didn't he score? So it was 0-0 at half time, and then you're thinking, well, here we go again. And then Burley scores, I think, the most pivotal goal of the season, for a brilliant reverse ball by Jackie McNamara.
Oh, brilliant.
To make it 1-0.
Yeah, superb.
And that just gave him, the impetus and the belief. And to be honest, I don't think Rangers had made many chances that game, and then Lambert pops up in the last few minutes with the screamer. So 2-0 in my back. Because if we lost that game, I think we went 7 behind. So we win that game, and we're within 3 points, something like that. You then fast forward to the last game, which was in April, where it's kind of nip and tuck. I think we'd managed to get 3 or 4 points ahead by that point in time. And we go to Ibrox and we lose 2-0. And we didn't play particularly well that game. And then we lost in the Cup. Was it the following week? We played them in the Cup semi-final. It was at Celtic Park, because Hampden was getting refurbished. So we look back in that season, they were pivotal games in determining the league, and I think these will be pivotal games. Even though Lenny, I heard Lenny saying yesterday, won't have a great impact on the kind of final position, but it will. And the psychological boost of winning the game tomorrow. If we were to win that tomorrow and go and win the game in hand, to go 5 points ahead, I think it would be plain sailing from then on in.
I think there's a massive psychological boost involved, Jim. I think, you know that season so well, and I think it's interesting actually to point out that we only beat Rangers on one occasion during Wim Jansen's time at the club.
Correct.
The other thing, again, but this can be argued away, I didn't think that Jansen was all that interested in bleeding any youngsters into that side. But again, that's because it was a project, if you like. He had to get that job done that season, and he had to stop the 10. Yeah,
because I think I said that last week, or last time I was on, that it's very hard to bring in young players, because this whole going for the 10 is affecting everything else. I think maybe the second last time I was on it, we signed Patrick Klamala and Sorrow back in January for serious money, £2 and £3 million, something like that.
Yep.
Now, back in the day, if you signed a player for a lot of money, he'd be in the next Saturday, you'd all be dead excited. But we're signing players at £2 and £3 million and not playing them. And it's understandable why they're not getting played, because the games are too big. And it's like 97, 98 all over again. Every point's a prisoner. You can't drop a point. If you were to draw a game and drop 2 points, it's an absolute disaster. So every game is really, really important. And as I think I said last week, that unless you get 3 goals up, you're not enjoying the game, because you could potentially lose a daft goal before you know it. And it's like the Livingston game a few weeks ago. You're cruising and you lose a goal and it's only 3-2. So you can't stick a young player on. I think, was that not the game that I think Lenny had 2 or 3 subs warmed up and ready to go? I think Turnbull was going to come on, and someone, all of a sudden you lose a goal. And you think, well, hold on, we can't maybe take off Scott Brown, because we need him there to see us through these last 10 minutes. So it's totally understandable why younger players or newer players are not getting involved in the team in the same way it was back in 97, 98. I think back in 97, 98, we had a core of about 13 or 14 players. And we're very fortunate not to get injuries or suspensions that season, because, we didn't have a huge squad. But what we did have was a kind of really good first 11.
We did.
And it was them that took us over the line. So people like Henrik obviously and Lambert, they were exceptional players. Good guys at the back like Big Stubbs and Reaper. So it was a really good, solid team. But lucky with injuries, lucky with suspensions. And a wee bit lucky that the other guys didn't play to their full potential, because if they did, they might not have done it.
When you look back on that first game that season against Rangers, the game where Gough gives us the 10 fingers, and another element of that was the fallout between Tosh McKinley and Henrik Larsson up at Barrowfield.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to Tosh about it, I've spoken to Simon Donnelly, because some of Henrik's blood ended up on his tracksuit, or was it a shell suit top at training. And you had all that going on in the background as well, Jim. You had the fact that there was an issue between Jock Brown and Wim Jansen from early on in the season in terms of their relationship. So you did have some division in amongst Celtic. So when you look back on it now, it's incredible the job that Wim Jansen done.
I think when you looked into that season in that kind of depth, it was remarkable they managed to win the league. Yeah. Because there was so many things happening. Jansen comes in at the last minute, basically. Back in the day, there wasn't a transfer window, so you were signing players as the season went on. So it wasn't until I think just before the Rangers game that we signed Paul. The first Rangers game we signed Lambert, which was like November or so. Harold didn't come to December. I think we only signed about 4 players at the start. I think we signed Henrik and Darren Jackson and Reggie Blinker and Craig Burley. Burley obviously was a phenomenal signing. Johnny Gold, the guy who was hardly getting a game for, who was it? Bradford Reserve or something like that. So it's kind of Wim Jansen, coming out of a foreign country, tries to pull this team together, lots of foreign nationalities. After 2 games, people are screaming for his head. He must have thought, what's this about? But bit by bit, he got it together, and he was a phenomenal manager. It's just a shame he didn't, obviously, stay on for longer than that one season. But they managed to stop the 10, which was the main thing, and that's what the team across the city are going to try and do in this year. So they're under loads of pressure as well. Yeah, tomorrow, so it's not like a kind of one-way street. And they think they're playing. I think they are maybe playing the better football. They're a lot more, faster, direct than we are. We tend to kind of push and probe and try and pull teams out a wee bit. It's a wee bit like chess, the way we play, kind of let's go left, let's go right, let's play. They're a bit more in your face, direct, hunting in packs. So it'll be a fascinating game from a tactical point of view. And you mentioned earlier about the team. So is Lenny going to pick the team to play the game or to play the other team? So interesting. It will be. It certainly will be, Jim. And I think when I've been watching Celtic this season, like everybody else, and picking holes in every game, not in a negative sense, but so that we can analyse them and discuss them on a Celtic State of Mind, the one thing that has been striking for me is where we play so much football down the left, but it's far less effective than Frimpong on the right. And I think that's why I would be throwing in Diego Laxalt, even though it's his debut and it's a big game. We're playing the title challengers, and I take all of that into consideration. When you look back on your Celtic supporting life, Jim, when a player comes in who doesn't really know the Scottish game, yes, Celtic are a global brand, and we tend to deem the derby game as one of the biggest derbies in the world. There are people who aren't all that concerned about it in Uruguay, and there's people who aren't all that concerned about it if you're playing for AC Milan. So I don't really think there's the pressure of him making his first appearance, for sure, making his debut for Celtic. There's a new team. He's played a bounce game. He's obviously not trained with everybody in the last couple of weeks. But there's no risk, I don't think, in throwing Laxalt in there, is there? I think you're right. I would throw him, because I think we do need something better down that left-hand side going forward. I think Greg Taylor is actually not... Yeah, he's been pretty good. He's hardly put a foot wrong. But in terms of... It doesn't have that burst of pace that Kieran Tierney had to get you past somebody, get you to the line to cut the balls back. So he tends to play the ball back quite a lot. So when you're looking for a bit of speed, it's not really there down the left-hand side, whereas on the right-hand side, Frimpong's just like a rabbit. Give it to him. So if Laxalt, and I haven't seen him, but if Laxalt gives us a bit more pace, a bit more penetration down that left-hand side, then you're going to keep the other team guessing. Because I think if he plays Greg Taylor tomorrow, then everything's going to come down the right. And they'll double up on Frimpong down the right. And so where did the chances come from? Where do you go? And I think, like you said, I think he'll play Laxalt tomorrow to get ahead, to play the game, to try and go and win the game. They're actually playing quite well. I mean, you can't argue with how they've performed so far in terms of the goals they've scored, hardly any goals against, and the points they've got. It's been very, very similar to us. There's not much in it. I was looking at this yesterday because I thought I better maybe do some research on what's actually been happening this season. And the fascinating thing I found that we've only lost one goal in the second half this season.
Interesting stat.
And that was the boy Livingston at the ball from distance. And the 4 goals that we've lost in the first half, 2 of them were penalties. One was a deflected own goal, and one was that from a corner from the St Mirren game.
Right.
So we've only lost 5 goals this season. They've only lost 3. To be fair, and we've scored roughly the same. I suppose we've scored 26, they scored 25, something like that. So in terms of, I mean, just the bare facts, it's not as if it's a kind of deeply analytical Celtic by numbers or anything, but in terms of looking at just the kind of top line numbers, they're very similar going into this game. And it's just a shame there's no fans there because, it's going to be a good game.
Let's touch on that just for a moment then. So I'm thinking of your Celtic supporting life. I had a wee chat yesterday with Stevie Mullen, who looked back on some of his favourite Celtic games. And when I look at occasions where there's been issues with fans in the stadiums, there's been a few in your life in different circumstances. So we're thinking about the game we had to play behind closed doors against Atletico Madrid because of the Rapid Vienna fiasco. Yeah. And ultimately we were knocked out of the tournament that season, unfortunately. You've then got a situation where we were banned from Ibrox, and under Lou Macari we managed to go out there and get a 1-1 draw. And obviously there was a couple of fans that hired a plane to fly a banner across the sky there. And there's been occasions, of course, where the games have been boycotted, but they weren't empty, were they, Jim? I mean, you obviously were in about the mix of the Save Our Celts movement in the early 90s, so you know all about that. But there were still fans at the game. There were just low attendances. I think, was it 12,000, 14,000, that kind of thing. So how big a part is that going to play in this fixture of all fixtures?
I find it still a bit odd watching the games on the TV when there's nobody there. And you can watch one Sky channel where they give you some noise, and then one Sky channel gives you no noise. So you watch the Sky channel with the noise to make it sound like a football match. But it's still pretty much like, I think I said last week, like over the park and watching a bunch of amateurs playing in terms of atmosphere. So Celtic thrive in the atmosphere of Glasgow derbies. So people like Scott Brown, you can see him getting pushed on. He just loves milk and all that kind of stuff. So it will be a factor. There's no doubt that'll be a factor, and it'll be weird for the players, if not for the fans. Just it's going to be a really weird season, the whole thing. So we need to get used to it, I suppose. But it's going to be difficult. It's going to be just really, really strange. It's
going to be difficult to get used to it. I think we're sitting here in October, the first derby game, and I'm certainly not used to it yet, Jim. But just in a few moments, we're going to be having a look at some of the comments that our viewers are sending in via Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So let's have a look at some of the comments coming in. Joe Porter, you are a regular visitor to Celtic State of Mind's bulletin, and you're talking about the issue around Ryan Christie obviously missing the game as we speak, and obviously Arsenal pushing to try and get Tierney in for the Man City game. So Joe says, if one shoe fits, it fits everyone. On another note, if Arsenal deemed Tierney far too important to miss a big game, then the Celtic youth setup have done magnificently to produce such a gem. Absolutely, Joe. And I think that, I was actually talking about this last night. We're talking about the players that have been brought through, if you like, under the respective managers during the 9-in-a-row era. And I had to give special praise to Ronnie Dyler because, Ronnie gave Kieran Tierney his debut, he gave Callum McGregor his Celtic debut, Chris Ayer, Ryan Christie. And, he developed many other players as well, Jim. But, I think this season, going back to, and this is why I keep harking back to the Wim Jansen season, there's no chance that Celtic and Neil Lennon are going to have the opportunity to bleed young guys in unless it was absolutely necessary this season, is there?
Yeah, and that was the same last season. And it was the same that, like I said the other day as well, that if we'd have played all the games, we'd have won the league with a few games to spare. And then Lenny would have just, given all these guys a chance. Sorrell would have played, Patrick Klamala would have played, even young Dembele would have played last season. So you get a chance to see what they're like. But there's no chance, as you say, that anyone's going to get in there because the size of the squad as well. So if you've got a bench that's got Tom Rogic on it, or potentially Lee's on the bench as well, potentially. You've got David Turnbull. You've got a really, really strong bench. So how does even a young guy go on the bench? Never mind and you have to be fair to all your players because the other thing that we don't know how it is to manage a football team at that kind of level. So if you're learning, you're trying to keep everyone happy, and you've not getting a lot of game time. And that's why I was always quite surprised that Cham never left because he's not getting a lot of game time. And I from a personal point of view, if everyone's fit, I don't see him playing either. I see him coming on maybe for the last 10-15 minutes to give Scott Brown a break. I maybe the odd game he's going to leave him out. He may be playing Cham, but he's not. Well, for me, that's just again personal opinion. I don't see him as a kind of first 11 player. Maybe he might go in January, but astonished he stayed. Good he stayed, great he stayed. And as I said, I think he'll play tomorrow because he's an experienced guy.
Yeah.
And I think Lenny will go for experience in that game and hopefully he scores the winner or whatever. But it's just really, really difficult to bring in young guys, understandably so.
Oh, it definitely is. And Celtic have a great tradition of doing it, Jim. When you go right back to, the 1950s and the Kelly Kids, and then it went obviously on to the Lisbon Lions, the Quality Street Gang. We're moving into the 70s and 80s, and you've got players like Roy Aitken, Tommy Burns, Paul McStay, Charlie Nicholas. It went on and on. I think we stopped producing to that level maybe during the 90s, in actual fact, and that's maybe because we were chasing somebody else. And
I think also fans like to see that, like to see somebody from the local area. And obviously things have changed that, not harking back to the good old days, but in the 60s and the 70s, you can have Roy Aitken and Tommy Burns living in the same street, maybe drank in the same pub as you, so you're more identifiable in terms of the fans, but that's now not the case. But that's the way football's going, that most of your team aren't from Scotland, never mind from your local area. So, but yeah, it's always good to bring young kids through, but you actually wonder, if it's actually worth it in terms of the expense. I mean, obviously Celtic spend a lot of money in Lennoxton. Is it good value for money? Who knows? Because the thing I always notice when you play teams in Europe or even watching the international games, some of the so-called smaller nations or teams from smaller nations have got some fantastic players.
Yeah.
Who are not getting paid a lot of money. So, he's well going out and buying 6 or 7 of their players rather than spending millions of pounds on a youth setup. Well,
the thing I keep going back to, Jim, is we hark on about the Reserve League because we remember it. There's a generation of football fans out there who won't remember what the Reserve League was. And we talk about it as a bridge between youth development, elite football, and moving into a first team. And there's a huge gap there. And I think, obviously, back in the day, we had the Reserve League. And for a number of reasons, that was disbanded. But we're too far down the line now to ever reintroduce it because there's not enough teams would be able to finance a reserve team in a reserve league. So I think the only other option that has been spoken about, of course, this season and in previous seasons, is the Colts setup, whereby a team like Celtic, they're investing so much money in youth development at Lennoxtown that they do have a team playing competitive football, not under 23 football, not under 21 football, but they're playing in a league and they're playing as part of the pyramid. And I think that's something that perhaps after everything settles down here and we see the real extent of the damage to some of the clubs, Jim, that we'll need to revisit.
I'm not so sure about that one. I understand the logic behind it, but I think you have to look at the quality of opposition you're then playing. I think the lower down the leagues you go, the more physical it becomes. And I'd be concerned if you took somebody like young Dembele, and I'm trying to think of who plays in the lower tier Scottish Road, East Fife in there.
East Fife, yeah.
In there. So young Dembele's up in East Fife and he's kicked up and down the park. So I'm not so sure that that's such a good idea. I understand a bit about playing competitive football, but it depends who you're playing against. And I think what they've tried to do over the last number of seasons, maybe have European tournaments,
yes,
UK tournaments, where if you're playing the Barcelona equivalent, then that's good because you're playing players of a similar standard. How many games you can get out of that, who knows? Obviously none with the current pandemic, but I think it's a difficult one. And I think if you've got a youth setup and you spend millions of money and you are able to sell something like Kieran Tierney and recoup, what was it, 25 million or so?
Yeah.
Then that pays for it and that's absolutely fine. But how many of the young guys actually come through into the first team and stay there? I mean, James Forrest is one, Callum McGregor is another one, and Kieran Tierney from memory. In the last 10 years, say, is there any more you can think of?
Well, but beyond that, you're looking at players like McManus, Kennedy, McGeady and Maloney, which seems like a long, long time ago.
Aye, that was the previous maybe decade. So you're thinking that if you were to look, is Lennoxton value for money in terms of bringing on young talent, 3 and 10 years, not such a shoe, but Forrest has obviously played a pivotal part in the 10. Callum McGregor's played a pivotal part in maybe 5 or 6 of the 10.
Mm-hmm.
Kieran Tierney's played a pivotal part in 2 or 3 of them, plus recoup 25 million. So from that point of view, it gets a big tick. If we had less players than that and we hadn't sold anyone, I'm not so sure that's worth it. When you could maybe go over to Lithuania or Macedonia or Serbia and sign 3 or 4 highly gifted players out there who are earning buttons, who are coming here, it's almost a finished article. Mm-hmm. So it's one that's, I mean, there's goods and bads in terms of how that works out, but I think Lennoxton has been value for money just because of the 3 of them, plus the transfer fee we got from Kieran Tierney.
Yep, Kieran Tierney, probably Aidan McGeady was a wee bit earlier than Lennoxtown.
And Aidan brought in about 9 million as well.
Yeah.
Something like that. So that was good money. Sean Maloney, what was his transfer fees?
I think, it wasn't as much as you recall, because I think...
Villa for 3 million, something like that. Something like that. And who else did you say? McManus didn't go anywhere, Colwell didn't go anywhere.
Kennedy was unfortunate enough to have to retire. But it's one of these things where if Celtic were bleeding in 4 and 5 youngsters this season and we didn't win the league, there'd be plenty to be said about it, Jim. So it's maybe a romantic notion that I have that every season we've got this conveyor belt of 4 or 5 players to come through.
So what do you think will happen next year?
Well, next year, this is the big question. What happens next? We've spoken a wee bit about that on the pod as well, Jim. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, does 11 in a row then become your reason for being? Or do you start looking beyond that? And do you start looking beyond even Scottish football at that stage?
I think you have to look beyond that. I mean, I think 10 is the big target. Once you go beyond 10, I don't think it matters that much. You want to win the league, obviously, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. But as I think I said last week, you've got the Champions League factor as well. So if you win the league and you get into the Champions League and you earn 30, 40, 50 million pound, that becomes the be-all and end-all then. And it depends who you're playing against, because if the level of opposition continues to be what it is just now, we might be hard pushed to win the league. It was different under maybe Lenny's first time round and Ronnie Dyler's time, whereby maybe the quality of opposition wasn't as tough. Therefore, you could take some chances. But if the quality of opposition is tough and it's pushing you all the way, you really can't afford to slip up any games. Livingston, Hamilton, any of these stuff, you can't afford that. So,
but Jim, have you not seen the news? Gerrard will be the England manager next season, so they'll need to find somebody else to bring in, and will he be as effective? These are all the things we're going to have to consider. But you'll remember all the talk back in the day about Celtic trying to push a move into the English League, and we've had some fascinating insights from the likes of David Lowe and Paul Smith on this show, talking about buying Wimbledon Football Club for £40 million, changing the registered address to Celtic Park, changing the name of the club to Celtic.
Yeah.
That is never going to happen now. I mean, we've seen this week, obviously, the big picture, the proposal down in English football. They're basically looking after themselves down there. That's never going to happen. And in actual fact, at this moment in time, it can't, because there's regulations and stipulations that would prevent it. But what I did like, looking back to the early 2000s, and you'll remember Alan McDonald was pushing pretty hard for this transatlantic league. Yeah. I think it was called the G9 at that time, wasn't it? And there was 9 nations who were going to be involved in it. Yeah,
I think that's the way future. That is the future. I think I've said before that it's one of these. You should watch what you wish for. Some of the things. If we end up in that English top tier, which is just a money pit, spending ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, I can't get my head around some of these transfer fees. irrespective of who it is, unless it's Messi or Ronaldo, 80 million for Harry Maguire, you know, and they'll say these things. We're looking at Sky just now, but they'll say this stuff as if it's no big deal. Some guy that plays for Villa, who's the guy that plays for Villa this year? Who they're touting? He's an 80 million pound player. Never heard of him. So it's a big number. I think was it Bayern? Who's the guy at Bayern that Man U interested in? Jason Sanchez. Is that his Sanchez? Anyway, they've getting quoted 120 million for this guy Sanchez, who plays. It's either Bayern Munich or Dortmund, German team anyway. 120 million for one player who could get injured the next week. It's just bonkers.
But during that speculation, I think Man U were offering 108, and then you're watching Sky Sports and they're asking the pundits' opinions on this, Jim, and they're saying, "Well, what's the difference between 108 and 120?"
It's mental.
Well, it's 12 million pound, mate.
Mental. It's absolutely mental. And from a personal point of view, I don't like it. And I wouldn't like Celtic to be in that league where they're buying players for £60 million, £70 million. I can handle 5 or maybe 9. I mean, when we signed Eddie for 9, you're thinking, what are they doing? It's £9 million. It's a huge amount of money. Never spent that before. So I've just got to get my head around 9 million. You know, if it was 90 million, you're thinking, what are you doing on one player? Plus his wages for 3 or 4 seasons. What have you got tied up in that one player? And what if you sign a Mesut Ozil who can't be bothered?
I know.
£350,000 a week. I'm not playing.
To look after the mascot.
I mean, it's just, and that's where football goes mad. And I think in Scotland we're a kind of halfway house. I don't think we're mad. It's kind of okay. And a lot of people like Scottish football.
We've still got a bit of a, you know, there's the sensibility there. And I had a great conversation actually with Johnny.
I was going to say that, yeah.
And what he said was excellent. What he said, we've retained a bit of that beauty, that, you know, that old romantic notion. Why did you fall in love with football? Scottish football's still got a bit of that, Jim.
Absolutely. And that's why I think, as I said, I wouldn't like Celtic to be signing players for £80 million. Even if they had £80 million to spend, it wouldn't sit right. Plus the wages, because these guys are on, say, £100,000 a week. That's £5 million a year. 4-year contract, 20 million plus 80. There's £100 million tied up in £100 million. And as you said, the guys in Sky Sports, what's the difference between 108 and 120? 12 million. And it's so blasé.
I know.
You know, and also the fact that football is this fantasy world. Whereas we live in this real world where people are losing their jobs, COVID's kicking in, and we're saying, oh yeah, sign him for £80 million. It's just utterly bonkers. But
it's crazy.
The question you posed was about what's the future? The future for me is some sort of European league. And that goes back to that Nations League thing. That was a good idea, because what they actually did is we're going to pair you up with teams of a similar standard. Mm-hmm. So we don't get a doing off somebody, or you don't give them a doing. Not that we've given anyone a doing recently. So you're paired up with Israel and Slovenia and the Czech Republic. You're not paired up with Germany, Italy and these kind of guys. So that's quite a good idea. And I think that's the future. A European league where you start off Division 1's Real Madrid and Barcelona guys, and we're maybe Division 4 or 5. And we're in there with maybe Sporting Lisbon and Anderlecht and all these kind of guys. And you work your way up a pyramid system, up the way and down the way. And possibly, if you're a Celtic or near neighbours, maybe you've got enough money to keep a team in Scotland. Kind of like your Colts thing, but a better version of your Colts thing, who can't win the league. And you make that an optional thing for all the teams. So if Hibs want to join this European League, they can join the European League. And maybe Hibs couldn't have a second team because they couldn't afford that. But by all means, Hibs going to Division 9 or Division 10 or something like that. So you put something in place where if teams want to be ambitious and go into the European League, on you go. And if other teams can't afford it, they want to do it, then they stay where they are. And you've got a better league then here. So teams like Kilmarnock could win the league because the bigger teams are not part of that league. And I just think that's a better way forward for me, because you then work your way up. But if you actually work your way up, at some point you get into Division 1 and you're back in with the guys who are spending £80-90 million again. So where's the kind of balance with that one? You know, but I think, as I said, be kind of careful what you wish for with some of this stuff. And it won't happen soon unless Sky think it's a good idea.
If they think it's a good idea, yeah. And then
the bit you said earlier about the top clubs in England want to have their own say. There's something that started happening. And as you said before, it's all about money. So if bringing Celtic to the party is going to up the money for them, then they'll quite gladly discard Burnley and West Bromwich Albion and Crystal Palace and these guys, because they're not bringing money to the table. But if Celtic are doing that, then I don't think they're that bothered what you're going to call the league. don't care. And the other bugbear of mine was the fact the Champions League there, that was the first Champions League final between champions in like
I know
15 or 20 years or something like that. You know, and that annoys me, that whole kind of, you know, you can have 4 teams in the Champions League from one country. It's just madness. You know, it just devalues everything.
Oh, it certainly does, and it's contrived. I think when the original proposals were spoken about quite seriously back in Alan McDonald's day, they were talking about a system whereby if, let's say, the top 2 clubs in Scotland entered into this European or transatlantic league, there was an opportunity for them to get relegated back into the domestic league and for clubs in the domestic league to get promoted out of it. So there was all these different kind of pyramid systems within that actually benefited everybody. So it wasn't as if Celtic would fly the nest and never be seen again. You know? So I think that's something else that will come back to the table at some point, Jim. Now, Kevin Graham, who will be known to a lot of people who tune into a Celtic State of Mind, Kevin is saying Jason Leach, Airdrie fan, cough cough, will be thinking up an excuse as we speak, and obviously he's referring to Ryan Christie not playing tomorrow. My money is on different rules in different areas of the country. Would you expect, Jim, for Celtic to be in active dialogue with Arsenal at the moment?
Oh, aye, definitely. And as I said at the start, I don't know what the reason would be for letting Kieran Tierney play, but if he gets to go ahead, then you'd have to piggyback on that with Ryan Christie. You'd have to go, if they've said it's okay because of this reason, whatever that reason may be, we would just play the same card. Now,
Damien Gallagher has made an interesting point, because as I said before, Jim, Celtic have been particularly badly hit by this virus in terms of players being out of tomorrow's game. And Damien asks, do Rangers have the squad to cope if the virus was to hit them as it has hit other squads? I don't think any club in Scotland would be. Celtic have a particularly strong and deep squad. So, like you said there, even the worst case scenario, we could put a team on that field tomorrow, and you wouldn't be expecting for it to be a walk in the park for Rangers.
I think if you took 3 of our key players out, Eddie's one of those key players, maybe Ryan Christie's one of those key players. If you took three key players out from us and 3 from them, I think they would struggle badly. If you took Kent, James Tavernier, and one of the centre backs, what's his name?
Hollander.
Goldson.
Goldson.
So if you take their 3, looking at that just now, if you take their 3 key players out, I think they would struggle. If you took 3 of our key players out, I think we'd be okay. I think we would cope okay. But again, it's just farcical all this stuff that's happening.
No, you're absolutely right.
And also things the fact that because if your players have been picked by the national team, ipso facto, they must be the best players. So you're sending your best players away, and those are the ones that are most at risk.
They're the ones that are most at risk.
And there's no duty of care, which is the kind of punchline for me today. There's no duty of care at all.
Now, you mentioned something earlier on when we were talking about who to play on the left-hand side, be that Greg Taylor or Diego Laxalt. And one thing I would say is obviously the international game's been played over the last couple of weeks there, Jim, and Scotland have gone through the sequence of games unbeaten, and they're obviously progressing under Stevie Clarke. And I made the point yesterday to a few people that, back in the day of Craig Brown, for example, we would actually qualify for the major tournaments, the finals, and a lot of the time we would be playing people who were journeymen. So you can remember some of the players I'm referring to, Matty Elliott, Colin Calderwood. These guys would play a lot of games for Scotland, but they'd get the job done, not in a spectacular fashion, not great to watch a lot of the time, but they would get the job done. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because Steve Clarke obviously was a huge part in the development and the progression of Greg Taylor's career. And I think that he is typically the type of player that Stevie Clarke would like, a guy that goes out and defends. And I think that's where there's been a wee bit of a misconnect when he's come into the Celtic side. He's getting the ball far more often than he's probably used to up in the top third of the pitch. He doesn't have that instinct. He takes a touch where sometimes you want him to play it first time. He goes backwards, he goes sideways. And I think that is what we've been looking for. Someone more in the mould of a Frimpong. You're not going to get another Frimpong, but Laxalt, more direct, more offensive. And I think that's why I would throw the Uruguayan right in tomorrow.
Oh, aye. The more attack-minded players, I would, back to the start, I wouldn't play the team, I'd play the game. I would say we've got a better 1 to 11. Let's attack and let's just go for it. albeit they're a very dangerous team on, you know, on the, if things, you know, if you're playing a cautious football, like from right to left, left to right, and suddenly they get the ball, they just attack in packs, you know, so we have to be wary of that. But at the end of the day, and obviously Lenny will know exactly what he's going to do, but I would play the game. I would just go and attack and let them think about us and see how it goes. And if we score first, I think we'll be absolutely fine.
Let's have a wee chat then about the game itself. I've predicted 2-0. We have no idea at this moment in time if Edouard will make up any of the 20. Yep. We don't know, and we're asking the question about Ryan Christie. I think there is a potential for there to be a development between the end of this broadcast and the broadcast that we do tonight at 8 o'clock, Jim. We might be talking about Christie being in the squad. That would be fantastic. I wouldn't write that off yet. No. But I have predicted 2-0. And normally I would say Edouard's going to score a goal. It all comes down to who we pick up front. I've picked Griffiths, and I'm going to say Griffiths is going to score. So that's my prediction. How do you see the game going tomorrow?
I'll go 3-1. I think both teams will score, and I think Lee will score a couple of them. I'd like him to be on from the start. I think it will cause the most damage if he's on from the start. I think we have to keep them moving at the back. If we play that kind of side-to-side stuff, that'll be right up their street. So we have to bomb down the right with Frimpong, bomb down the left with so. We have to Griffiths moving, and maybe, as I said earlier, maybe play Moy alongside him. Just keep moving people around, and I think we'll get a bit of joy through there. But we have to be very careful of how they play. And as I said, it's down the right, Tavernier, down the left, Barisic, whip the balls in. And they're not whipping high balls in, they're whipping balls in a bit, you know, waist height. That's where they're getting their joy. So Duffy and Ayer and Julian have to go in the game. Bit concerned about Julian because he's not played in 4 or 5 weeks.
Another consideration, yeah.
And obviously a bit concerned with the guy in the black tomorrow. So that's out with their control. So
well, there's been a few things out with their control for this game, and we'll cover that just before we get finished up, Jim. But Jai McD, the reason I brought you into the discussion here is you're mentioning Johnny Owen and the fact that he was a breath of fresh air. And I would like to touch on this. For anyone who tunes into the broadcast on a daily basis at 12:30, and we thank you all for getting involved because the numbers are growing, and we're here obviously to engage with you as well. We don't always get through every single question, of course, but we do try and cover as many of the points that are raised as possible. But we've done an interview earlier this week, Jim, with Johnny Owen. And Johnny, of course, was one of the earlier guests on a Celtic State of Mind when it seriously was recorded around a kitchen table and recording phone calls and that kind of thing. He gave us his time, even though he's a hugely successful actor, director, author. He's a board member at Nottingham Forest. And he's a great guy, and I was so enthused listening back to that interview. And I think what we'll do on Sunday is I'll put it out as a podcast on Speaker and iTunes, etc.
Such an enthusiastic guy.
What did you make of Johnny? His knowledge was brilliant, wasn't it?
Such an enthusiastic guy.
Aye.
That was the bit that came across, that he just loved stuff. It was just, this is good and that's good and that. He's just dead enthusiastic, and I love enthusiastic people because they make things happen. So yeah, and looking forward to the Three Kings. Steen, Busby, Shankly.
I was doing a wee bit of digging about online yesterday, so it is listed as the 4th of November. Is at the Glasgow Film Theatre. It's going to be shown it. So get registered on the website. The Three Kings is called threekingsfilm.co.uk, and you'll get an email alert to tell you how you can claim your tickets. There's going to be limited amounts, obviously under circumstances. It would be brilliant to be able to go and see that film. I'm going to try my damnedest to get a couple of tickets, Jim. But Johnny did say he would come back on the show, so let's get him back on after the Celtic Rangers game. But it was funny because after he had been on, I don't stalk anybody, Jim. I'm like yourself. It's nice to have that contact, but I won't stalk them. But every so often, if we were maybe playing Rangers, he would send me memes of Effie Ambrose and all that. So we stayed in touch throughout that period, and it was great to catch up with him again. But of course, his fiancée Vicky McClure plays alongside Martin Compston in Line of Duty, so there's the up-to-date Celtic reference. But he was a Celtic fan way back. He was coming up during the 80s and 90s.
And you don't stalk people, is that right?
No,
I don't. I don't stalk
don't.
people, and there's a wee gap.
Honest.
There was a wee bit you left it hanging there as if, maybe I do stalk people.
Oh, honestly, I don't. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure because, as I say, it's great to get people involved and engage with Celtic fans who watch a Celtic State of Mind. We're going to be back on tonight at about 8 o'clock. I'll confirm that on the social media channels in case there's any issues with getting the guys through. I'll be joined by Jim Simonetti from the Jimmy Johnson Academy and also Stevie Mullen from St Roch's. But all that's left for me to say today, Jim, is thank you once again for joining me on a Celtic State of Mind.
Thanks, Paul.